TTArtisan made the lens Nikon won't let Sigma make. The TTArtisan 75mm f2 autofocusing telephoto prime, a small and compact form factor, and the oh so important retro style and aperture ring. But the fact that this type of lens is still a gap in Nikon's Z mount is an indictment against Nikon? Actually, it's Nikon's indictment against Sigma, whose DGDN lineup, including my favorite 65mm f2, should have been available in Z mount years ago. Did TTArtisan beat Sigma to the retro game at a third of the price? Hello, I'm Jack, scientist by day, street photographer by night, and this is Bokeh Therapy. Canon caught a lot of heat for not playing nice with third-party lenses, but the truth is Nikon's just as bad. But while we're waiting for Nikon and Sigma to play nice, spoiler, I don't think this will ever happen. Here comes TTArtisan. Today let's talk through 7 common compromises third-party lenses have to make and decide if this 75mm f2 is style over substance. One compromise only comes out at night. TTArtisan sent me this lens for review but are not sponsoring this video. No money exchanged hands, they don't get to preview the video before it goes live, and as always I have final edit. Compromise 7 for third-party lenses is focal length. They need to pick something off kilter, a range not covered by first-party lenses, so how's 75? The focal length does have a legacy, most notably Leica's lineage of 75mm lenses, but most modern brands don't bother with this focal length, just like Sigma's 65mm. It's a step tighter than 50. And almost identical to the end of the range on a 24-70, but I tend to shoot it like an 85. At 75 I get a bit more environmental context, but telephoto primes aren't normally my first choice. Street shooters normally prefer shooting wide, just like most auteur filmmakers, Spielberg, Scorsese, the Coen brothers. The exception, Ridley Scott. His go-to focal length is 75mm and longer, a distinctive compressed telephoto look to tell fantastical stories set in different times and different worlds. But it's a different Scott Brothers final movie that taught me how to shoot with 75. Compromise 6 with third-party lenses is autofocus. Reverse engineering lens protocols is never as good as native first-party offerings, but that gap has closed. I found the TTArtisan 75mm f2 really snappy autofocus-wise. Face and eye detect, 3D tracking on the ZF works just as well as my 35, 50, and 85mm f1.8 S primes. This is both in bright daylight and at night, though just like Nikon's S primes, TTArtisan can lose the subject occasionally, so I program my shutter to 3D tracking, and the AEL AFL button to AF area mode plus AF on. The second tracking mode I choose is wide area AFL. It's a reliable backup option for me. The Sigma 65 focused perfectly on my A7 IV and A7 CR, but that's what having access to Sony's lens protocols does for third-party manufacturers. I'd say the Sigma's tracking autofocus is stickier on Sony bodies than the TTArtisan is on the ZF, but that mostly comes down to camera brands' autofocus algorithms and their intellectual property. In 1994, Nikon's R&D made a breakthrough. The Nikon Zoom 700 VR-QD was the world's first 35mm compact camera that came with vibration reduction. And this set the stage for Nikon's next breakthrough, the AI AF VR Zoom Nikon 80-400mm f4.5 5.6 DED, a huge telephoto zoom with an equally huge focal zoom range, and VR transformed the utility of the lens for sports and wildlife. But before VR could make its way across Nikon's telephoto lineup, along came Sigma. Compromise 5 with third-party lenses is not sharpness. We'll get to that in a second. It's optical aberrations like chromatic aberration or fringing. Backlit in broad daylight, layers of leaves and branches in and out of focus, you can be the judge. I'm kind of shocked at how clean this looks. Maybe a bit of green fringing, very little, if any, purple fringing anywhere I looked. TTArtisan have been doing this for a while. Their 56mm f1.8 for APS-C and 50mm f2 manual focus lenses don't have fringing or CA either. The main flaw of their 50mm f2, that's here as well, more on that later. Sigma's 65 is the best corrected out of the DGDN lineup in my experience, no CA or fringing to speak of in any of the shots I've taken, but you'd expect that at 3 times the price. This lens' biggest and maybe only compromise came out at night. Compromise 4 with third-party lenses is the type of glass and coatings they use, and you usually see the cost-cutting show up in terms of purple fringing and CA. While this 75mm f2 doesn't have fringing or CA, its biggest optical flaw is flaring. I didn't see it much during the day, but when you shoot at night, the overexposed street lamps and high dynamic range scenes show ghosting and veiling when you point it near bright light sources. It lacks the same coatings of the Sigma 65mm f2, but personally I love love lens flare. I can get interesting looking circles and semicircles of diffraction and use it for effect. Style over substance. Tony Scott was the poster child for style over substance. While his brother Ridley chose high concept projects, Tony liked working in gritty urban settings. He defined the maximalist look and feel of 90s action movies, frenetic pacing and telephoto shots to bring the background to the foreground. The big city that engulfs us all was just as big a character as the characters themselves, all brought to life by the compressed look of longer lenses. But it's not until I saw Unstoppable that my approach to photography changed. Compromise 3 for third-party lenses is sharpness or lack thereof, but again, not the case for this TTArtisan lens. It's sharp, certainly as sharp as I need in the center, not quite as sharp in the corners, but most people don't want telephoto primes with flat field curvature. Sharpness is where the Sigma pulls ahead, but really there's not much in it. The corners are sharper on the Sigma, yes, but I'm still getting usable resolution and contrast wide open at f2 on TTArtisan. For bokeh, the Sigma is cleaner, but whether this is better is up to taste. TTArtisan has a bit of that vintage swirl around the edges, a nostalgic look compared to the more clinical modern rendering of the Sigma. You also get more compression on the TTArtisan at 75mm, but the Sigma can focus closer, 55 versus 75 centimeters on the TTArtisan, so I think the depth of field for the two lenses is a draw. Despite Nikon's huge R&D lead in 2003, Sigma played them to a draw. Sigma's Apo 80-400mm f4.5 to 5.6 wasn't just the same focal and aperture range as Nikon's 80-400, it was also the first Sigma lens to feature OS, optical stabilizer, allowing for slower shutter speeds on telephoto zooms, similar to Nikon's VR or vibration reduction. A little too similar, suspiciously so, and in the end Nikon had to take Sigma to court. Compromise 2 for third-party lenses, build quality and physical controls. Custom function buttons and switches can be expensive to make, and the TTArtisan doesn't have weather sealing. There's no rubber gasket at the lens mount. I'm assuming the lens isn't sealed throughout, but Sigma doesn't bother with sealing throughout the lens body either. They just add a rubber gasket at the lens mount. Moisture and dust can still get in through other moving parts on both of these lenses. But almost no modern lenses or cameras come with an IP rating. They're still electronics at the end of the day. Interestingly, none of Nikon's Z lenses come with aperture rings, because an aperture ring is hard to weather seal, especially one that has clickable positions and hard stops. It's how all my Fuji lenses have failed over the years. I'm slowly coming around to Nikon's thinking, and even though I love aperture rings, I've gotten used to my Brutalist S Prime lineup. In this case, I'll take substance over style. Commercial success was never the problem for Tony Scott, but he came up empty when it came to critical acclaim. Then in 2010 came Unstoppable. Rather than shoot the runaway train on wide-angle lenses, Tony stuck to his guns, showing telephoto close-up after telephoto close-up. The villain in this film had no backstory or dialogue, it was just flawed engineering at the end of the day. Yet the inanimate train took on a life of its own. The tracks, the sparks, the head-on collisions. Tony brought the background to the foreground using longer lenses. It can tell untold stories about urban life. Nikon's 2011 lawsuit accused Sigma of patent infringement. In their opinion, OS was clearly stolen from VR, and in the end, Sigma settled for $14.5 million. But consumers are the ones who pay the price for corporate squabbles, and why the only Sigma lenses out for Nikon Z mount right now are the cheaper APS-C lineup. Can they ever recover from this rivalry of the past? The last compromise, compromise 1 for third-party lenses, is design language. It's hard for other manufacturers to get the look and feel right, and Sigma's DG/DM primes never look right on my Sony bodies. They'd be a much better fit on the vintage-inspired ZF. The black metal finish, fonts, and the clickiness of the aperture ring all match the ZF's look and feel, but so does TTArtisan. Arguably, they did an even better job with the retro design, but it's not just style over substance. It's an amazing lens compared to the Sigma at a third of the price. I wish Nikon and Sigma would settle their squabbles, come to an agreement, and we'd instantly have access to a whole suite of DG/DM primes, but we can't always get what we want. What I want is another Tony Scott movie, but Unstoppable was the final entry in his decades-long filmography. Here's a toast to Tony Scott's brand of style over substance. Let me know if you have a favorite Tony Scott film in the comments below. I'm Jack, capturing peace in every moment.